How popular is the view that there is only one Quran, that it is completely identical to every other copy of the Quran, and there are no variances, not even in one single letter between any two copies of the Quran? How well is that being defended at the academic level? How popular is it?
Yeah, that sort of viewpoint, while I know some popular level preachers who espouse it, at an academic level, I don't know anyone who holds that view.
You have a couple of different narratives. So one is the popular level Muslim narrative, which was told to them by their leaders and their scholars. People like Sheikh Yasser Qadi have told Muslims that since the time of Uthman, there have not been any two Qurans that differ in even one letter, not one letter's difference. That has been the standard Muslim view for the past couple decades. I have Muslim apologetics books using this as an argument that it has to be miraculous. They're saying not one letter, not one diacritical mark, not anything is different between any two copied Qurans from the time of Uthman down to the present. And they basically say human beings make errors. So if no Quran copyist has ever made a single error, this has to be miraculous. So just a quick question, since you're looking at things at the academic level. At the academic level, so scholars and so on, scholarly books, scholarly articles, scholarly conferences and so on, how popular is the view that there is only one Quran, that it is completely identical to every other copy of the Quran, and there are no variances, not even in one single letter between any two copies of the Quran? How well is that being defended at the academic level? How popular is it?
Yeah, that sort of viewpoint, while I know some popular level preachers who espouse it, at an academic level, I don't know anyone who holds that view. Those aren't simple matters of, different vowel markings and stuff like that. There are differences in the diacritics, and there are differences in even the consonantal text, the actual skeleton of the text, which is, of course, the premise behind the title of my presentation, Variations in the Consonantal Text of Quranic Manuscripts.
David, come on, man. The Quran is perfectly preserved in oral tradition. That's a standard one we get, even though, people in Morocco, they're going to be orally reciting the Warsh Quran, not the Hafs Quran. So you get the differences even at the level of oral recitation.
Nowadays, there's a lot more uniformity in the oral recitation of the Quran, but that was not always the case in earlier stages of the transmission of the Quran. There were three key events that happened in that early transmission that we need to know about. So the first one would be the first Quranic recension by Zayd bin Thabit, which happened under Uthman. And this was such a watershed event in the Quranic history that to this day, we refer to the canonical mainstream Quranic text as the Uthmanic text. But the variation did not end there, because there were still a few variations that needed to be smoothed over. There was a second Quranic recension that happened in the early 700s under the Caliph Abd al-Malik, and it was done by Al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf. Now, there's some debate as to what exactly Al-Hajjaj bin Yusuf did with the text, but the common understanding is that he probably added long vowels to the Quranic text. Despite that, there were still some differences in recitation. And over time, multiple qira'at emerged from the Uthmanic text. What happened in the early 900s was that a Muslim scholar by the name of Ibn Mujahid chose 7 of the most popular qira'at, and he canonized them as the 7 standard readings.
The weird thing is, whenever I hear about making changes to the Quran, it's always interesting. It's like, and I haven't talked to Muslims about this, but it's like, do you believe this guy was divinely inspired to be making these kinds of changes? Like Uthman, when he has other Quranic materials all burned, and we know that there were people who disagreed with Zayd on some things. Or even when Uthman says that if you're going to write out the Quran, write it in the Quraysh dialect and things like that. For those Muslims who think that the Ahruf are other dialects or something like that, then he would be getting rid of different ways that Allah has revealed them. And, the same thing with Al-Hajjaj and the same thing with Ibn Mujahid. You've got all these different qira'at going around. And then Ibn Mujahid says, well, these 7 have my, stamp of approval. And the question is, like, Muslims, what do you think about him? Do you think he's like divinely inspired so that this man can actually point to 7 and say, these are the good ones, don't trust the other ones? It's just this weird situation. Like, if things are revealed by Allah and Gabriel and Muhammad, and then you've got the original no companions. On what basis do these later guys have the authority to even be making decisions about the Quran like this? Who is Ibn Masud to be saying that he doesn't like Zayd's Quran? Who is he? What authority does he have? Well, he just happens to be the guy Muhammad said, if you want to learn the Quran from anyone, learn it from Abdullah ibn Masud.
So Ibn Masud's codex has been mostly lost to history. We don't have an actual codex or mushaf of Ibn Masud's reading. The closest we have to it would be recordings of what they contained in Qira'at literature. So Jeffrey, in his materials for the history of the text of the Quran, uses some of that Qira'at literature, chiefly Ibn Abi Dawud, and he records what those variants were. So here's one page of Jeffrey's book where he shows you those variants. There's some really interesting ones in here. So I'll give you one of my favorite ones. So in Surat al-Fatiha, in the canonical readings Muslims recite to this day, you would say, Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim, guide us along the straight path. Well, in Ibn Mas'ud's codex, it says, Irshadna sirat al-mustaqim. So instead of ihnina, it would say irshadna. So imagine you had a whole community of people doing their salat prayers, and then when they start reciting Surat al-Fatiha, instead of saying ihdina sirat al-mustaqim, they would recite irshadna sirat al-mustaqim. Like Muslims today, if they heard that, would lose their minds. But the fact that this variant is here means that Ibn Mas'ud and his followers were reciting a different version of al-Fatiha.
So just to be clear, I mean, the common Muslim belief that we get, so the first common belief is that there are no textual variants. Once you show that there are textual variants, they'll say things like, but the oral recitation is so perfect that if anyone were to make an error, it would be caught. And what you're saying is, you go back to the earliest companions of Muhammad, and they not only had variants in their recitation of the Quran, they had variants in the recitation of the chapter that they recited most frequently. Like the point is, if your method of an entire community is reciting something, therefore no one's going to get anything wrong. If you actually believed that, the greatest example of it should be Surat al-Fatiha. That should be like not even a possibility of a variant, because if Muhammad reveals it and then they're using it all the time in their prayers and the whole community is using it in their prayers, how are you ever going to get a difference? Maybe somewhere way down the road, if some guy is a brand new Muslim, he goes to an island with the Quran and he's never heard anything correct. Maybe he comes up with some mistake or something like that. But when it's Ibn Masud disagreeing with Zayd, these are both guys who should know what Surat al-Fatiha is supposed to be. And yet, even there, we find variants?
Even if, it doesn't change the meaning necessarily, it still does introduce a variation at the consonantal level, which is precisely what a lot of the apologists are trying to deny happened.
You also have, even to modern times, like in Surah 33, verse 6 of the Yusuf Ali translation, Yusuf Ali includes a note. So Surah 33, verse 6, that's the verse that says Muhammad's wives are the mothers of the believers. But Yusuf Ali has a footnote, and he says, in some qira'as, such as that of Ubay ibn Ka'b, occur also the words, and he is a father of them. So That's interesting that it's like, and then he makes a point about this, emphasizing the spiritual connection of the believers to Muhammad. It's like, wait, but there's not even in the Quran that people use today.
So here are some of the variants that appear in Ubay bin Ka'b's codex. He doesn't have quite as many variations from the Uthmanic text that Ibn Mas'ud does, but he does nevertheless have a number of significant ones, including differences in the rasam.
The thing that we're hearing now that Muslim da'is are acknowledging that there are variants in the Quran. So it's basically, for years they were saying perfect preservation right down to the letter. It's a miracle, and sharing this as one of their Dawah arguments. Then people pointed out, like Hatun Tash showing up at Speaker's Corner with Qurans with different words and so on, actually showing them, putting them in front of their faces. These are different Qurans. Then, of course, they went back to the same da'is. How do we explain this? And their da'is said, it's just different dialects. So then Muslims ran around saying it's all just different dialects. Then we started pointing out that, no, you can't account for some of these variants by appealing to different dialects and so on. And so then they started getting an understanding that which previous generations of Muslims understood, but the new generation did not understand, that you have these different qira'ats and so on. So now they're being told that all of these variant readings of the Quran somehow go back to Muhammad, that Muhammad revealed them in all these different ways. Now that's actually what Sheikh Yasser Qadi was in most trouble for in his famous Holes in the Narrative interview. He said that, when you become a student of knowledge and you find out about all these variants, there's a tendency to just agree with and accept whatever explanation your teacher gives you. So your teacher will say, this is different. This is just different dialects, or yes, it was revealed in all of these ways. And Yasser Qadi pointed out that it's Western critics who then point out, hey, that doesn't actually work. And he basically agrees with them. He's saying, yeah, we don't question these things. When we get an explanation, we accept the explanation. But it's Western critics who come in there and say, that doesn't work, right? That doesn't work, explaining it like that. And that's when he said, all I'll say is the standard narrative has holes in it. And he was pointing out, one, not only that there are all kinds of variants in the manuscripts of the Quran, but two, that these standard explanations for why you have these, we'll talk about the ahruf and the qira'at and so on, that they may not actually work. And he's concerned that they don't actually work. Do you think that the best explanation of all of these variants is that they somehow all go back to Muhammad? Muhammad revealed them in all these different ways, and now we sort of have remnants of them. Or would you explain these differences in some other way?
Yeah, I think that the most parsimonious explanation is this is all the result of human error. The idea that all this go all the way back to Muhammad wasn't even the consensus among Muslims themselves until after Ibn Mujahid. I would agree with people like At-Tabari, etc., who would say, yes, reason why people read these things differently is because at some point along the way, people miscopied a manuscript, or people mispronounced a word, or because someone thought that a certain synonym made better sense than the word that they found. So again, very human explanations for why these variants exist. I don't think that Muhammad told one group of people to say Beit Zukhruf and another group of people to say Beit Dahab. That's a later explanation.